I'm Micaiah Bradley, and this is my literature IOC for Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. The extract I'm analyzing starts on page 11 of chapter 2 from "She was stretched on her back beneath the pear tree, soaking in the alto chant of the visiting bees, the gold of the sun, and the panting breath of the breeze, when the inaudible voice of it all came to her." And the last line being, "That was before the golden dust of pollen had beglamored his rags in her eyes." In this extract, Hurston develops a motif that is prominent throughout the novel of destiny as well as nature and the idea of achieving that destiny. And this is portrayed very well in this section. And in this section, it's entirely narrated by the author from a third-person point of view, and there's no dialogue in this section from the characters. And the section is very abstract and poetic, which is very contrasting to the normal way the dialogue is written in this novel, as it's written with an Ebonic dialect that is the normal way that people spoke for the setting of this time period. And there's many parts in this section that are abstract, but connecting the metaphors to these larger motifs that she's developing. And in the third line of this section, starting, that's the end of the first sentence, where she says, "When the inaudible voice of it all came to her." This line that talks about this inaudible voice illustrates very well how this was a force that she couldn't pin down and was speaking to her. And it makes sense why these abstractions are poetic and very unspecific, as it's to illustrate how these are being delivered to Janie, the protagonist in the story, and how these ideas are being delivered to her. And it starts as a revelation to Janie that she realizes, quote unquote, what marriage is, in the line, so this was a marriage, where she steps out on her porch or before that, sorry, she's beneath the pear tree and observing nature, and she sees the mingling of these organisms in nature and how they're interacting with each other, and the codependent nature that drives them to seek each other. For example, in the line, "She saw a dust-bearing bee sink into the sanctum of bloom. The thousand sister calyxes arched to meet the love embrace, and the ecstatic shiver of the tree from root to tiniest branch, creaming in every blossom and frothing with delight." It's very important and significant that she uses thousand sister calyxes to describe those, because even though they would be considered sister calyxes, that just using the word sister already puts into the reader's head the idea of them being girls. And this makes sense because of the analogy she's using that she does by personifying these organisms that don't have conscious and voluntary behavior, and personifies them by saying that they arch to meet the love embrace and the ecstatic shiver of the tree from root to tiniest branch, with trees in this case being the male aspect. And these two sides of the same coin, in a sense, coming together, also helps illustrate this motif of nature that Hurston develops throughout this novel, because it is not the voluntary action that these plants are taking, but that's just the but it's just their nature, and that's what they do. But she describes them as if it's something that is voluntary, which sort of blurs the line of voluntary versus, or free will versus determinism, where this is a big motif in the novel, and Janie, and through narration we see Janie looking through the lens of the horizon and seeing life as this process of searching for the horizon, and this big idea of destiny plays a large role here as well. And after Janie realizes that she understands what marriage really means by observing nature, she says she had been summoned to behold the revelation. Then Janie felt a pain remorseless sweet that left her limp and languid. So in this quote, it's clear that Janie at first was inspired by this and seeing how beautiful all of it was, but then she felt sad because she didn't have this in her life. And this is emphasized more when later she says, with kissing bees singing of the beginning of the world. She was 16. She had glossy leaves and bursting buds, and she wanted to struggle with life, but it seemed to elude her. Where were the singing bees for her? This line pointing out, or these lines that, for one, point out that she's 16, which is significant because it's an age that we typically associate with girls maturing emotionally and physically, and the idea of this all happening during the spring and causing the blossoming of plants is helping further illustrate this sort of newfound seeking that Janie is doing and feeling that it's her time to look for a relationship. And with the last line from that quote, where were the singing bees for her? This points out well how she believes that there's bees for her in the first place, and the line itself is almost indicative of her believing that, sort of tying back to the motif of destiny, that it's not just the fact that she doesn't know if she has bees singing for her, quote unquote, aka the men or male figures that she would want to introduce into her life. It's more that she believes that there are already, quote unquote, bees, singing bees for her that she just hasn't found. And this idea of seeking and questioning and just searching is further developed with a lot of these questions or one-word sentences. For example, she felt an answer seeking her, but where, when, how? And a lot of this is ties together at the end of the section where we see, through pollinated air, she saw a glorious being coming up the road. In her former blindness, she had known him as a shiftless Johnny Taylor, tall and lean. That was before the golden dust of pollen had beglamored his rags and her eyes. And in this section, we see that she is in this state where she's searching and prone to get an infatuation with a man because of her feeling that she needs to have a relationship and that it's the primary goal in her life. And through this mode of being that she's in, she spots Johnny Taylor, and he seems to be the perfect fit for everything she's looking for. And this is further emphasized with the last line. That was before the golden dust of pollen had beglamored his rags and her eyes, and pollen being seeds in nature of flowers in the spring that are passing and flowing through the air. This helps illustrate how this sort of spark of love, quote unquote, is flowing through the air, and it's catching her and catching him at the same time, and the reader can intuit that Janie will pursue Johnny Taylor after she saw him, which she does in the book. And there's also a lot to further develop the motifs about destiny and God. There's a lot of diction, such as in the line, she had been summoned to behold a revelation. Revelation isn't necessarily a religious term, but in the Bible there's a book of Revelations, which is a part of the Bible and can be seen as a potential biblical allusion. And even if the reader doesn't necessarily catch it as a biblical allusion, just the whole sentence in general, using the word summoned and behold, sort of make an image in the reader's mind of something holy, and we usually behold things which are holy or special, and summoned is also something that's not used every day to describe mundane things and circumstances. And the last sentence in the second paragraph of this section, waiting for the world to be made, which precedes the sentence looking, waiting, breathing short with impatience. So the two sentences together, looking, waiting, breathing short with impatience, waiting for the world to be made. Waiting for the world to be made is sort of a mythological allusion to how the world is made through this sort of duality of chaos and order, or masculine and feminine, and a lot of religions such as Christianity are built on a lot of this kind of foundation, which really helps illustrate the point that I think the narrator is trying to make here in this point of the book, with this being like a divine, otherworldly power, in a sense, that's taking her over, because the world, mythologically speaking, emerges from this coming together of these opposing forces, and that's exactly what Hurston describes and illustrates through this imagery and diction, describing the organisms in nature that combine together and use each other and are codependent on each other for this beautiful marriage to arise from it. And it helps make out what Janie is really talking about and being inspired by. And all of these examples that are these biblical allusions or mythological allusions make even more sense when taking into account that this isn't Janie speaking, but the narrator sort of decoding what she's thinking from an inaudible voice. So these aren't even words that are being said in Janie's mind. These are just what would come out if we could transcribe her thoughts. And it would be mostly in metaphors, because a lot of this is things that aren't exactly concrete and in the physical world, like her desire to manifest this marriage that she believes she now understands, for example. And this definitely plays into what is to come in the novel, as Janie, for the whole of the novel, does go out on a lot of her whims and motivations in the moment that aren't exactly grounded in physical, concrete things a lot of the time. And this is where a lot of her conflict in the story comes from, disagreements with her nanny, for example, and why relationships didn't work for her, because she would always have this motivation to do something that to others would seem illogical. So this section does foreshadow well how Janie acts on her intuitions and how this helps her in the future. Thank you.